listening to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast, a Godzilla podcast for hardcore and casual fans alike, and everyone else in between.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us this, I guess it's evening now that we're recording. This is David, co-host of the Kaiju Apostle podcast, and joining me, as always, is the fabulous Chris Hornscourge. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, I love how you're going to keep changing these adjectives on me.
Oh yeah, just wait till next week.
Yeah, I hope by week 35 or whatever, you still have some new ones to give me.
Oh yeah, trust me, I've got a thesaurus of great ideas.
I can just imagine
here we go.
Like, looking these up. Oh.
I had to.
We've just discovered sound effects tonight, but I think we promised to behave.
I will. I absolutely will. Here, what I'm going to do is I have now narrowed my window where I cannot easily access the drum button, so we'll be good.
If you hear him silent for too long, he's looking for the drums.
Yeah, I will find him. Anyway, thank you for listening. Chances are this is the second podcast you've listened to, which I did not come up with a title for tonight's episode, being episode 2, because Attack of the Clones is probably my least favorite prequel film, so I wasn't really inspired to come up with anything.
You could do like the Clones Raid Again.
Yeah, that works.
I mean, Clones and Again, there's kind of a thematic.
Yeah, that's better than anything I would have come up with. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I mean, it's been really encouraging to get the feedback that I've gotten so far from a lot of y'all. I actually said y'all. Just regarding this idea. I mean, like we talked about last week, I've been trying to do this as a blog for almost a year now, off and on, and I've already gotten better feedback and engagement from people in a podcast form compared to what I did as a blog. So that's been encouraging. We didn't turn off a lot of people with the theology and religion talk, so that's cool. We'll definitely make sure to turn it up this week. But no, I mean it's been awesome. So I really appreciate you guys listening. It's been a labor of love on my end, and I would say it's probably a labor of love for Chris, just because this is out of your wheelhouse entirely. But I appreciate you being a good friend and a good sport.
Yeah, so if you follow me on Twitter at Chris Worms, I kind of made a comment about that. So the jury's still out on the verdict. I am the jury, and I am here. The verdict's still out on how I feel, because I feel like there's not really been too many movies where I've felt so differently about the first two.
Sorry, I was taking a drink. Yeah, it's okay. So let's just dive in.
Yeah,
we're just gonna jump right in. What did you? Because I agree with you, but why?
Yeah, so I think pretty much.
Oh wait. Synopsis. Yeah. So for all y'all who haven't seen this movie, a few months ago I would have said you're not missing out. But anyway, so picking up from the last film, one of the cliffhangers was that, if humanity doesn't learn from their mistakes, there'll be another Godzilla. Well, hey, guess what? There's another Godzilla. And now we have this irradiated ankylosaur called Anguirus that they start fighting. They fall into the water. They're like, oh, well, crap, Godzilla's back. And they pull out this really crappy dinosaur book that's like clearly, it's just a horrible plot device. But anyway, they try to keep Godzilla away from, I don't remember what part of Japan it was. I don't have my notes in front of me on that. Anyway, it just ends up they fight in the city, cause a lot of destruction, and then they eventually trap Godzilla in a bunch of ice. Yeah, I mean it's really a weird plot, and that's a horrible synopsis because there isn't a good one on Google for me to find. But yeah, I mean, going from Gojira to Godzilla Raids Again, yeah, it's a complete tonal shift.
Yeah, and it kind of cracks me up because at least with the first one, we had the human element of the villagers on the island who are like, oh shoot, Godzilla is really bad. Like he keeps eating our fish, and now we have to sacrifice our daughters. And now, like, the worst thing that he's doing is eating tuna. I don't know. And then they like wind up on the island to find them fighting kind of each other. The human element has already been removed from that for the most part. And I think that was kind of that was already a strange shift for me.
Yeah, you're right. It's obviously with the first film, you definitely feel like there's more. There's a sense of responsibility where Godzilla was their fault, right? Or not necessarily their fault, but humanity's fault. And this time around, it's just kind of like, oh wait, here's a couple monsters, and now we're caught in the crosshairs of their fight, right? And in a sense, it is still humanity's fault that Godzilla Jr. exists, but
Amen.
yeah,
Oh wait, we're not talking about the son of Godzilla.
no, that's years down the road. But yeah, it's different though. You're right, and I mean we talked about it last week. I think this is where you really see the difference between having a different director. I mean, like, yeah, so obviously it's a tonal shift for you. I mean, what was kind of your, I don't know, your ultimate verdict, but yeah, just tell me more about I can't imagine watching this for the first time being in your 20s, right? I grew up on this film. I was probably 3 when I saw it. So for you to see it for the first time, it blows my mind. I want to just rip your brain out and just put it in a HDMI cable or something.
Yeah, that would actually be distressing for all involved. So I'm in complete agreement. I think the thing that really kind of what I was trying to say, and I think you helped clarify my thought on it, was that it was just a little too, like, the stakes were high eventually, but I kind of got this feeling that the two were just going to kind of duke it out on that volcano island by themselves until one of them died. So it was almost like, had they not gone out there, they wouldn't have known that this was happening, and it would have been completely an avoidable problem. And that's probably not a great read, but it just seems like a Shark Week movie more than it does a movie about nuclear warfare and the sins of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, obviously they probably would have made it ashore eventually, but yeah, it's just kind of like this was all happening and no one knew. Whereas in Gojira, you still had the Odo Island. You know, like they were dealing with Godzilla regularly, right? You know, like that's what you're talking about, is having to make the sacrifices and all that. Like that was part of who they were. It was part of their identity. Whereas this time around, yeah, I mean, if they wouldn't have flown over the island, it feels even more like a plot device than it did the first time around.
Yeah, the hard part about this one in comparison to the first one is, I think that's a perfect way to put it. We needed a second Godzilla movie, and maybe part of the reason the stakes felt so low is, like, I'm not wrong in thinking this is actually just another Godzilla. Apparently there's like a Godzilla species.
Yeah.
And so
this ends up being the Godzilla, at least for the Showa era, this ends up being the same Godzilla for the next like 13 films.
Okay. So, but essentially there was this first Godzilla who had the oxygen destroyer used on him, and now he's gone.
Yep.
And then this is a second Godzilla who's identical in every way except being dead.
Correct.
Yeah, something about that. It seems like, I would have probably liked a little bit more to say, like, okay, so what made the first Godzilla unique? Or are all of these lizards just going to be giant now? There's always going to be another Godzilla when we need a sequel.
Yeah. Well, and that's to me, I'm like, what are the odds that this nuclear testing would have created the same result, right? So it's the fact that you drop a bomb and the first one ends up, with radioactive breath, right? And then apparently it did the same thing for the second one, but this one's just incredibly uglier. I mean, be honest, the suit is horrible. It's absolutely horrible, especially the puppet parts. Like, I don't know, did you notice that when it's up close, it's actually just hand puppets?
Yeah, and I kind of looked into that. I cheated a little with the behind the scenes stuff
Yeah.
because I was just I was like, seriously, like, I was so confused. Like with Power Rangers, when they do Japanese and English footage in the same episode, and they just kind of hand wave it away, pretend this is the same thing. I was kind of curious again, and apparently no one was very happy with the design up until the point where they lost the costume that was shipped from Japan. And I'm like, the one thing you really had to protect to make sure you had in hand, you lost it? How the hell did you lose that?
Yeah.
Sorry, all children who are listening.
Yeah, that's fine. We talked about weed last week.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got to make sure we earn our PG-13 rating.
Yeah, we get one extreme expletive.
but yeah, it's just like, for me, you're right. Like, it's just the significance of Godzilla this time around doesn't feel nearly as profound. And to be honest, some of the next films will touch on that more, but
Okay.
I think that gets really into the heart for me personally. And I don't want to bias you at all. I really don't. But this is the reason why I prefer this era of films compared to some of the later ones. Because with Ishiro Honda, I mean, again, like we talked about last week, like his service in the military, his pacifism, his movies are largely ethical in nature. And then you have a film like this that came out, let's see. So the original Godzilla came out in November of 1954, I believe. I'm pulling that up right now. And then this one came out in April 24th of 1955, right? So right there in itself, you're just looking at such a rushed production. And yeah, November 1954. So the amount of time between each film, I mean, you're looking at about 5 months, right? So the quality shows, it does, which, not that you can't make a good film in that amount of time, especially in the 50s and 60s, it was possible, but I mean, there's no way around it. The movie is a cash grab. I mean, when you can't get the original director involved because he's out doing another film, he was directing a movie called Love and Makeup, which I really want to find a way to watch this. I'm sure there's some illegal way. But it actually
He's
looks...
joking if the NSA is listening.
No, I'm totally not. Please arrest me. No, but like he wasn't available, right? So they just, I'm assuming they just rushed and they found someone else who would direct, and it's pretty obvious that it's just not the same. And it's not that, I mean, I'm looking here, so over his entire career, Motoyoshi Oda directed 50 movies, not to mention his work as assistant director, blah, blah, blah. So, like, he seems like, from what I'm seeing, is he was a guy where it's like, hey, we need a movie done in this amount of time. We can trust you to do it. And that's what he did. And to me, that's not worth it, right? Because this is truly, this film, like, there's some good stuff and I'm excited to get into that, but it just feels so much different in spirit than the first one did. And as we watch the others, it feels different there as well. This is definitely one of those things where, and obviously you've got screenplays involved too, it's not just the director, but I mean, this is the introduction of the kaiju fights, right? But I would say this is one of the worst examples of it. Like, the fights themselves are boring. The editing is so bad. Like whenever I don't know if it's like the whole when everything's all sped up. I mean, I don't know what they did there, but it's yeah, I guess is they slowed down the footage, and then I can't remember exactly how it played out. It just does not look good at the end. Oh, here we go. So some of the effects footage was shot at a slower speed, 18 frames per second. 3 cameras were set to capture the effects footage. 2 cameras were set at high speed, while the third was indirectly left at slow speed. But despite the error, they felt that the slow speed footage was usable, and since then used different camera speeds for different scenes. So yeah, it just seems like it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But your budget, you can't really afford to do it again.
Right. Shoot. But yeah, I get that it was rushed, and there's part of me that says, like, yeah, the first movie had all the deep symbolism and the philosophy behind it, but
Mhm.
I guess when it's number 2, I'm not going to judge you too harshly if your second movie is kind of a cash grab, because like, there's no way they knew directing the second movie that it's going to be like a 70-year franchise.
Mhm.
Like maybe they would have treated it with a little more respect if this was movie 24. And I know some of you are like, well, movie 24 was King Ghidorah's big dump. And I'm like, okay, sorry. But I don't know. It's like thinking about like with Star Wars, with the original sequel, and it was the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and Han was out. It was all foggy, so they didn't have to create sets. Like, when you don't know what you have on your hand, I can't blame you for not doing right by it right away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, I probably would have said, well, did you see the first one? Did you notice there's like symbolism and stuff in it? And if you said, well, yeah, but who cares? Then I'd be like, oh boy, maybe this is a mistake.
Yeah. Which, it really, and this is where I'm referencing my previous blog a little bit, like, there is definitely some meaning in the film,
Mhm.
right? Like, I think when I watched it the first time last year after not watching it for decades, um, there's definitely something to be said about there's humor, right?
Mhm.
But overall, it's like there's a sense of hopelessness.
Right.
So I'm gonna quote myself here. It's like, yeah, Godzilla's eventually defeated, but he's not killed. This time around, there's no Dr. Serizawa to save the day. Anguirus, a monster almost destructive as Godzilla, can only be defeated by Godzilla,
Right.
right? And the answer to defeating Godzilla, it's only discovered by Kobayashi's death, his plane careening into an icy mountain. But even that solution's temporary.
Right.
So you see someone like Dr. Yamane, he's already lived through this, he's having to live through it again. I mean, just I can't imagine, the flashbacks he's having, right? I mean, that's clearly like if we had more time with him, we'd probably get some like PTSD moments. Well, I don't know if PTSD was actually diagnosed back then, but like,
Yeah.
it's definitely, this whole sense of, yeah, it's just you can't, people are trying to cope with what's happened even if they were at a distance, like they knew what had happened before, and now people are trying to like wrap their heads around the fact that this could be happening to them again, right? So
Right.
In World War II, kind of what we talked about last week, last episode, yes, like we know no more bombs were dropped, but they didn't know that.
Right.
For all they knew, it could have happened again any day, right? Just because they signed a treaty doesn't mean that they couldn't have gone against it. So it's like this fear looming just in the back of your head. So like, yeah, there's some humor in this film, and I love that. I love, like, that's the thing I like about this film, and I like that continues throughout the films, because it's a good humor, it's mature humor,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still that sense of hopelessness in the film.
That's true. And I guess part of it too, well, and I'm going to kind of allude to something to revisit in a minute, but I think there's a part of the film where we're seeing the law of diminishing returns kick in, where you're absolutely right. Like, this is a second Godzilla, and now we're in a worse spot, because I wouldn't say that the plane crash is a self-sacrifice, but it is a human death, which leads to the somewhat abatement of Godzilla. which is similar to the end of the first, but the human death in that one was sacrificial so the oxygen destroyer doesn't come back to life.
Yep.
This human death does not prevent the future mountains or avalanches.
No, it's very temporary, which I mean that's the thing is even if there aren't later films, there's no indication that like Godzilla's actually dead. He's defeated, but he's not dead.
Just cold.
Yes, very cold.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think that if I'm in one of those planes and I know that he just roasted the other guy with his fire breath, as far as I know,
Mhm.
I would be like, well, I think the snow might hold him for 20 minutes
Yeah,
until he atomic breaths himself out.
I know. Yeah, I've been wondering. I thought about that too. I'm like, how did this stop him? And I mean, not only that, but like the next film we see him in is in 1962. So like, how did this keep him in there for 7 years?
Right. He's a cold-blooded lizard, and he's very, very thin-skinned. So I guess he just froze.
Yeah.
Or he's like, what's being cold like? Even though he lives underwater where it's probably very cold.
But I think, that's even part of how far you're right. Like, I don't think they had in mind, like, hey, this is going to be a 65-year franchise, so there wasn't really any planning with that. Right. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously it did take a while to pick back up on these films. Like you had some other kaiju films as we're going to go through, but yeah, it was just kind of like, okay, well, story's over. I don't think they really thought much about, or maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It's hard for me to think that they did think much in advance, for the future for what could happen. So then of course when he does come back, they have to pick up where the last person left off, right?
Right.
So how did you feel about the acting and the music though? Because that's actually what I really want to talk about.
Yeah, for having a director who seemed to want to just throw it together or was under direction to, like, it still seems like, yeah, the acting I still thought was pretty fine. Like, I was still like, this is better than a lot of current stuff that's just thrown together.
Yep.
It's still, I'll give that the humans still gave it a lot of weight.
Yeah. And so this is where like watching Kurosawa films has actually made me like this movie a lot more, which I mean that's just part of growing up and maturing, I think. But
Yeah.
so the composer for this film, Masaru Sato, I couldn't remember his name last week. So he was one of Kurosawa's main composers, which to be fair, and I haven't done research on this myself, apparently the score he did this time around is one of his least favorites, but there's some good earworms in there. But like for me, I feel like Godzilla Raids Again is an attempt to try to make a Kurosawa Godzilla film, just in the way some of the things are shot. So one of the main actors, I'm gonna pull this up really quick. So Minoru Chiaki. So he ended up being Kobayashi in the film, and he's the one that was very very humorous. But he is in numerous Kurosawa films. So yeah, Rashomon, Seven Samurai, Hidden Fortress, and Throne of Blood. I think there's even more than that. But that right there, I've seen all those films, and so like now that I've seen those films and I come back, I'm like, oh man, like he plays a very, I don't know, just he was very humorous, and I can appreciate that a lot. But it was a good sense of humor. Like it's not so like Chris Farley slapstick kind of like a comedy. Like it's a well refined comedy.
Yeah.
So just between that and obviously they brought back Takashi Shimura who played Dr. Yamane. But it's funny because he only shows up for a couple minutes, which is actually, I've seen a few Kurosawa films where that's the case, where he only shows up for a couple minutes. Now, Ikiru, he's the main actor, but like Hidden Fortress and Rashomon. Yeah, I mean, Rashomon is not necessarily the main actor, and there's a couple other films where he'll just show up. So, like, to me, that was almost like a nod to Kurosawa as well. Like, hey, we're gonna bring him back, but not have him like be as prominent.
Hmm.
But then we also see Hiroshi Koizumi, and he ends up becoming pivotal to the Godzilla franchise. So as we continue to watch these films, you're going to notice that, you know, he just, I don't even know how many Godzilla films he's in. He ends up like kind of playing different characters, but then not playing different characters. It's really confusing. So he was the main pilot. But yeah, it's just like the acting itself, for being kind of a nonsensical plot, the acting's just fine. And that's, again, watching Kurosawa more, I can come back and be like, okay, I can actually appreciate this.
I think there's definitely something to that though, because at some points you can have, and I really don't. I hate the phrase because I think it's used so like
Just say it.
well, it's Marvel humor. It's not an offensive phrase, but
Okay.
it's Marvel humor online means any humor that's not funny. And so it's not like quippy humor. It's still kind of smart humor, and unlike a lot of cartoons, or I can think of like Phantom Menace, the comic relief is actually kind of necessary because there is still a lot of tension in the film.
Mhm.
There's still a lot of like for me, I'm like, I have no idea how in the world they're gonna kill this guy unless
Yeah.
Anguirus wins, and I'm like, oh, that's not gonna happen. So there's still a lot of tension, so that the comic relief is like necessary. But you're absolutely right; it's not slapstick.
Did you ever watch Person of Interest?
Huh?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the humor in that show is the same way to me, where the humor is necessary because of how dark the show can be. And there's even some times where like it's funny, but you don't laugh,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can appreciate like it kind of brings some levity to the situation. So yeah, so like I said, I mean, for me, coming back to the film after, I don't know, almost a year, I can definitely appreciate it a lot more
Mm-hmm.
just because of my exposure to Kurosawa now.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, one thing though that I didn't totally appreciate, and there's one thing if you want to say that the second movie changed the theme of the first, or if you want to say it didn't feel like the first. There's a
Mhm.
lot of times where it's okay to question the main theme of a series. Like I think we've talked about this before in a personal conversation. But when James Bond movies or James Bond books were written, it was like a male fantasy. What if I had cool cars, hot women, and
Mhm.
awesome gadgets? And now with James Bond 25 allegedly having a female Bond, like does the James Bond franchise have the capacity to stand that kind of investigation of its own themes? Who knows? Who's to say? Not me. I've seen two of them. But the thing that kind of bugged me about Godzilla Raids Again is the view on the military changed fairly significantly. And knowing
Mhm.
that the director of the first was a pacifist, it was kind of a disappointment to see how much this movie relied on the military. And yeah, I mean, and I don't know, it's tough because no, they didn't secure a very good win for them. They buried Godzilla, but we know he's coming back.
Mhm.
But they still were kind of the victors in the end. And that feels like it already moves against the themes and the ideas presented by the first one, where they just get their butts handed to them.
Yeah. And that's what's crazy about the other films is like the military obviously is brought out as like a defense,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, and even a pacifist could argue that there's still a place for defending, not necessarily attacking, but that's another conversation in itself.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, other films down the road, it definitely there. Yeah, it's you're right. It definitely, you can tell again that someone different was at the helm. Just the whole like almost the ethics behind how they problem solved, right? It was just entirely different. Um, Whereas, you know, with Gojira, there was a definitely a a lot more deliberation, a lot more discussion about what to do. This time around, it's just immediately like, okay, well, what do we need to do to kill Godzilla?
Right.
You know, and I mean, maybe it's just because they're like, well, this has already happened once before. We know what he's capable of. Let's stop it, right? And
Mhm.
I can sympathize with that. But then it's also just kind of like, yeah, there wasn't nearly as much like there wasn't an ethical dilemma this time around, you know,
Yeah.
which not saying it has to be the same thing, but yeah, it's just it definitely yeah, it's just it contrasts quite a bit compared to the first and
I
that's what's
think
so crazy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I think I don't want to say that it went too far because
Mhm.
to be fair, I mean, they did try and lure him away from the shore,
Yeah.
and the fact that it was that explosion from the prisoners that lured him back, like there's still this idea that human sin brings Godzilla to the shore,
Mhm.
even if like their biggest sin was making a bright light. Like it seemed like they were going to be successful luring him away from shore until the prisoners try to escape.
I know. Which and even in that situation, our protagonists were slightly responsible for that too.
Hmm.
And I was thinking about that, like, you know, what would have happened if the thieves didn't break out? What would have happened if they weren't chased?
Right.
Right? Like, there's all these things happening behind the scene that ultimately result in this. Yeah, no, you're right. It's not just an immediate like let's blow Godzilla up. I spoke incorrectly there, but there, yeah, it's just this overall reliance in the military is what I was getting at.
Yeah. Well, that's still there, but it's still it still has some fidelity to the idea that it's really it's human hubris that gets Godzilla to your shore.
Hmm.
And yeah, they relied on the military, but they almost were successful in keeping him out until they chased and then the explosion. So all I want to say is like, I'm not here to poop on the movie. I'm not here to say that it completely abandoned the ideals of the first. It just had some disappointing shifts.
Yeah, which you know, to be transparent, this is probably within the fandom one of the least favorite films.
Sure.
Which I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's older and majority of the fan base nowadays. I mean, um, it's all about. No, I wouldn't say it's all about, but a large majority of fans. Which you know, I've changed my tune here. I think if you want to watch the films for the monster fights and all that, that's completely your prerogative.
Hmm.
But you know, the most popular films are probably the Heisei era. So that's like from 84 to 94, 95. So that's when you have the cool designs and all that stuff, which I guess cool is relative too. But
Hmm.
this is definitely one of the least favorite films because the design for Godzilla is completely atrocious. Even Jasper, you know, so as we've been going through these films, I've been watching them with him again. And Jasper goes, he is looking so weird. Apparently, it's just because Godzilla looked mad, but still, like the timing was hilarious because as he said that, I was typing in my notes, this suit is so ugly.
That's
And so
hilarious.
then when he said that, I'm like, that's perfect timing. I even typed that again later. I'm like, this suit's so ugly. But so yeah, this is definitely one of the least favorite films within the fandom,
Hmm.
which is funny to me because you're saying all this stuff. Like, I hope I'm not like pooping on a movie, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. But I don't think you're gonna offend a lot
It's
of
your hand
people by
collection.
saying what you
No,
say. What's that?
nothing. Ignore me. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
I'll edit that one out.
no, don't. I could see how I could see how it's like universally panned, but on one hand, I don't know, having no concept of what's coming later except for Godzilla 14, it seems to me like 35 movies is enough for them to say, here's a deep philosophical Godzilla, and here he is punching the crap out of a woolly mammoth. Like,
Hmm.
I could see why there should be room for both.
Yeah, and maybe this is where we stay for the rest of our discussion part because this changes the tone for the rest of the films. Like
Hmm.
from here on out, the majority of the films has Godzilla fighting another monster. So for better or for worse, this is what the films have become. But you know, on the one hand, I agree with you, but I feel like what ends up happening is you kind of have the same issues that you do in the Jurassic Park franchise, where the first film is not only just shot beautifully and scored beautifully and wonderful acting, and it has a great message, and then the rest of the films is just dinosaur porn.
Right.
You know, like they're Lost World's serviceable, but overall, I mean, you know, Jurassic Park 3, you have Lost World, I mean, not Lost World, Jurassic World, and then Fallen Kingdom, which I actually thought Fallen Kingdom has a lot of potential. I just feel like it had to play nicely with the first film. It's kind of like with Last Jedi, but that's another conversation. But yeah, I mean, it went from like this, you know, the Michael Crichton books had a lot to say. The first film had a lot to say, but then it was all about, okay, well, what's marketable? The dinosaurs, right? The action. And that's you lose, I think, some of what made that original film so powerful. So like, yes, I think you can have both. And we're gonna see in these films that you do have both and they work so well. But then once we get away from Ishiro Honda, I feel like you have films that don't know how to balance the two. And that's what's so unfortunate to me is you should be able to have both. So when I see people who are like, oh, it's never been about the humans, the human plot lines suck, like no one watches Godzilla films for the humans and all this stuff, I'm like, whoa, wait, what? Like, even as a kid, like, I mean, yeah, I like the monster fights, but like I still like the human side too, even if I didn't fully comprehend what was going on. I mean, like King Kong vs. Godzilla would not, even the American version, which I hate now, I loved it as a kid because of the humans. It was so funny. It was an engaging film, right? And monster fights were cool, but like if the humans weren't there, you wouldn't really have a film. You wouldn't.
Right.
So yeah, it's got to be a healthy balance of the two.
Yeah, and I think there's something that, and I'm like, this thought is now newly percolating in my mind. So hopefully you can make it a little more intelligent. But there's something to be said that in the first movie, when it's human versus Godzilla, the only way to defeat Godzilla is through like a moral atrocity that is absolutely murking the thing with the oxygen destroyer. But as we go on and as we see, like, something that kind of shocked me from this movie was that, like, not only is Godzilla like an actual, just an animal, like there's apparently like this Godzilla species, like Anguirus is also like just a species, just made huge now, right? Like, so,
well, that's what I didn't understand is the scientist, I'm gonna do air quotes around that, tried to say that like it's his natural size was this big, as if he was always, you know, had some form of radiation. Then, but that's what didn't make sense. I'm like, what?
yeah, wouldn't we have seen this before?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was.
Yeah, but so I guess, but still, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, as we get into kaiju fights, as we get into, I think from what I've heard of Scuttlebutt, like, I guess sometimes humanity teams up with Godzilla, and sometimes he's still the bad guy of sorts, depending on how you look at it. Like, we're moving away from human hubris and human atrocities to end this issue, and it's kind of like, almost in a weird way, going back to nature to deal with our kaiju problems. In terms of, like, well, we really screwed Godzilla. Like, he used to be a tiny little lizard, now he breathes atomic fire. But I'd rather trust him than use another atomic bomb to destroy Mothra. Or, even though I'm not really sure why he doesn't just fly into the sun being a giant moth. But that's for that movie.
Yeah, which, to be honest, Mothra is actually probably one of my favorite films of this entire era. So, like, the next couple films are probably some of my favorites, being Rodan, Mothra, King Kong vs. Godzilla, and then Mothra vs. Godzilla are like four of my favorite, hands down. So, I will say it is smooth sailing for a bit, but
for a bit,
yeah. But no, you're not wrong. I mean, we're gonna see that too. Is you go from Godzilla being this evil force that can't be stopped, and then eventually Godzilla becomes an answer to a greater threat, right?
Right.
And then he ends up becoming the friend of humanity, right?
Right.
And then you get the Heisei era that completely reboots that, and Godzilla ends up being bad again. And then you do the Millennium era, and it's kind of back and forth, and it's just like it's this weird, like there's not necessarily a consistent view, even within Ishiro Honda's films. Like, I mean, he had a few films where Godzilla's more of a ally than not, so it's not a I'm trying to think of the right word. Like, it's not just like a completely like this is it. There's definitely room for interpretation, which is good. I think that's healthy, right? I mean, it makes sure that the films can be relevant and can thrive. And I think ultimately, as long as the spirit of the original is there, that's when I feel like it's a good film. But when it's just so entirely different, where you're just like, man, like this feels, I don't know, like it's hard to explain, but again, I feel like as we go on, you'll notice some of those differences, and I won't have to point them out.
Sure.
Just kind of like how this one, I didn't have to tell you about it, and you're already like, this is weird.
Yeah. I guess what I'm like thinking kind of before you transition
Mhm.
is like this movie does kind of signal a transition to like how do we utilize nature, and sometimes that's a mountain and sometimes that's utilizing Godzilla, but that's still a better option to me than using nuclear warfare or nuclear adjacent warfare.
Yeah.
So
Well,
say what we will about its militarization, but there's still some things to like about this shift.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, I think if I would have recorded this episode 6 months ago, or again, no, really almost a year ago, I would have been a lot more critical,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that's even looking back on my blog, like I spent more time discussing what I got from the film, which is good. That was the point, right? I didn't want to review it. Um, but I definitely didn't like it last time. And this time around, I'm like, okay, like I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it because I kept thinking about, again, like this film, it really, to a certain degree, is dealing with the aftermath of World War II,
Mhm.
right? We're looking at this fact that like no matter how hard we try to get rid of these monsters, they never go away. We could even trap them in ice, right? And we think we've won, and then 7 years later, he breaks out of the ice and he looks even better than he did 7 years ago, which I think someone should capitalize on that, like this iceberg facelift treatment.
Oh yeah, the Titanic when it comes back is going to be beautiful.
Man, too soon. um, but yeah, I mean that's where I see in this film is like there's a sense of it's it's not just hopelessness, but it's like this monster that we're facing, like we're finding any way that we can to try to solve the problem now, even if it means that we'll have to deal with it later, right? But
Mhm.
as Christians, we know that that's not how evil is really dealt with, right? Like
Right.
we know that, even though we see sin and death in this world, it has been definitively dealt with. We just haven't seen the end, like, obviously God being outside of space and time, which I guess some people would even argue against that, but you know what I'm saying, like, the Jesus is the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world, like sin and death and all these things have already been defeated, and we believe, that God will bring every deed into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or evil, right?
Mhm.
So like we have to have hope that this evil will truly be defeated, even if all we can do right now is trap it in a huge pile of ice and pray, that something greater than ourselves will keep it in there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because I think that is a lot of where we feel like we sit. Is sometimes all we can do is rein it in, and sometimes all
Mm-hmm.
we can do is like I'm thinking of sometimes with charity when you're not upending the system, you're not, like, for people who are starving or stuck in poverty, giving charity doesn't totally break the cycle. In fact, you're kind of even playing into it. Those principalities and powers that Paul talks about in Ephesians, right? Like, these oppressive systems. Sometimes we do what we can, but we're still within the system. So we're like trying to abate evil, even though we're still kind of. Ending human poverty right now under systems as they currently are isn't going to be helped by me throwing $20 at a certain charity. It's going to take quite a bit more, but it doesn't mean don't do that. I shouldn't not give $20 just because it won't end poverty. They shouldn't have not buried Godzilla just because it wouldn't kill him.
Yeah. Well, but even I give $20, you give $20, people give $20, it adds up.
Totally.
It's definitely not, so that's something to keep in mind. And yeah, it's not always necessarily what's happening right now. It's knowing that what we do now impacts our future, right? So it's getting away from this view of Christianity that's so focused on the later, that it's got to be a both and. So like we invest in our present to help our future, but we also know that it's not just the future. What happens now is just as important. So
yeah. And there might even be something to say, like, you had mentioned earlier that there's no moral, ethical question about what we're doing to Godzilla today. But maybe it is kind of the secret, maybe the secretly ethical decision was to not kill him, just to bury him. Like, I think people from the last film would be thrilled to learn he wasn't killed. He was just stopped. I don't know. That's kind of going back, maybe a little disjointed from what we were just saying, but
yeah, no, it's definitely something to keep in mind as we keep watching these films, and we're watching the way that society changes and evolves and how they view Godzilla, and even how we do too.
yeah.
I will say one last thing too. Did you notice how Hidemi, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but the main lead actress, how she was not happy about the party there at the end. Like, oh, it was interesting, just like the approach they took and how women were spoken to, and just the fact that, like, just making comments about wives being controlling and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I don't know. It was really interesting. Like, for me, obviously it wouldn't pass progressive standards now, but even like having a woman be visibly upset and not just sit there and submit entirely, like, I can get behind that.
Right.
It was just a weird little aside. I had notes on it, and I'm like, I don't know where to insert this organically, so here we are.
Funny.
So, okay. So overall verdict, I mean, I don't know if we need to necessarily score it, but where do you stand?
I think what I'll probably end up with, I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna say that I like sat there and it's like, oh my god, this was so different. I hated it. There are some noticeable flaws. I think it'll probably end up being pretty low on my list, not because it's bad, just because I'm expecting that a lot will be easily better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, am I bummed that I watched it? No. Did I have enough fun to get me through the 80-minute runtime? Oh yeah. And I think sometimes that's all that matters. It'd be one thing if I was like planning on watching them all 5 times. Like every time I watch the series, I'd restart. Then I'd get pretty tired of this one. But knowing that I might not watch this one again soon helps me enjoy it a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not a bad film, but in light of the other offerings, it's not great. So, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to answer a couple questions. So moving forward, if you have questions about the next film, so we're going to be watching Rodan next. if you've got any questions that you would like us to answer, go ahead and shoot them via Instagram, or I am now on, we are now on Twitter, Kaiju Apostle Pod. I will absolutely regret getting on that cesspool of a website, but coverage and got to be out there. So yeah, just hit us up there. Would love to answer any questions. It doesn't even necessarily have to be related to the film, but obviously that'd be preferable because then we're not just talking about Beanie Babies or something.
Well,
but
Godzilla Beanie Babies, maybe.
There are, and I actually would love to have them for Jasper, but that's besides the point. So the King Ghidorah one's actually pretty cool.
King Ghidorah.
But anyway, yeah. I'm stalling. There we go. Man, you walked right into that.
I did. I think I kind of asked for it.
Yeah. So we have two questions here. Someone kind of misunderstood my question. Is like, do you have any like unused concept art for the film? I'm like, I'm sorry, man, I can't post pictures on a podcast. He's like, oh, my bad. Simple mistake. But so the first question these are both from Instagram. So I've got Predator Slayer. He was saying favorite non-Japanese Eastern monster movie. So the way he clarified that would be a film like The Host, right? That's a Korean film.
Stephenie Meyer?
No, not the Stephenie Meyer film. I actually have never seen that.
No.
Yeah, so he was like favorite monster movie from Eastern Asia besides Japan. So The Host, Pulgasari, etc. Which I don't know if you would really even be able to answer that.
Wow. Wait, you said not Japan?
Yeah, so it has to be somewhere in Asia, but not Japan.
Shoot. I mean, I was gonna say like Dragon Ball, but
that's not a monster film.
What?
That's not a monster movie.
There's monsters in it.
Yeah.
Look, I'm already grasping for straws, and then you take Japan away from me.
Yeah, but actually, King Ghidorah is in an episode of Dragon Ball at one of the Budokai tournaments.
Oh, that's
which I thought was kind of interesting. Yeah, little cameo. He's in the crowd. Yeah, and honestly, I had to ask him just to make sure I understood that right. So when he mentioned The Host, I'm like, well, crap, because that's actually a really good film. That would be the one that I chose, because I don't have a lot of exposure to non-Japanese kaiju films. But The Host is great. I highly, highly recommend it. If you've seen Snowpiercer or Okja, it is the same director there. I am going to draw a blank while I Google his name, and I'm sure I will butcher that. So The Host, yeah, it came out in 2006. Bong Joon-ho. It's got 93% Rotten Tomatoes, and on Roger Ebert's site, it got a 3.5 out of 4, even though I'm not sure who actually reviewed it, because not everyone, Jim Emerson's obviously not Ebert, but it's a really good film. If you have not watched it, highly recommend it. Rated R for creature violence and language. And then the second question, other than slowing down the monster footage, what would you change about Godzilla Raids Again?
Other than slowing down the foot, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of, we already maybe suggested this, but just a conversation in the middle with someone who's familiar with the events and conversations of the first film, saying like, hey, we really didn't want to kill him. We really tried our best to do otherwise. Like, he's still an animal. Just something like that. Maybe just kind of a quick reminder that this is kind of an ethical dilemma. Might have been cool. But of course, you can still have the character who said, yeah, but people are dying. He's stomping on people. It's like, well, shoot, man. I don't know. Go ahead and answer and see if I can think of something maybe a little bit different or better.
Okay. So part of me would have liked to see a bigger role for Takashi Shimura, just because like he seemed so despondent compared to the first film, which I mean kind of makes sense. But I felt like you're talking about the ethical conversation. It really could have came from him, where it's like, hey, we have a second chance to study Godzilla. Like, let's not waste it, right? I mean, people are still suffering from radioactive poisoning. Like, what could we be doing here? And they don't get into that at all, which is unfortunate. But I don't know if I would necessarily change that. I would have liked to see that, but I don't know if that's necessarily a flaw.
Yeah.
But definitely the suit. The suit is the ugliest Godzilla suit in the entire franchise, hands down. 98 film knocks this one out of the park, right? I mean, it's really just the angle. It's the angle. I mean, if you go on and you search for Godzilla Raids Again on Google and you go to Google Images, any side profile shot is serviceable. It really is. And then you get the front on face and it looks like a straight up demon. And not even like the most attractive demon. Like this would be like the third demon you would ask to Homecoming, right? If the first two said no.
Very familiar with that concept.
Yeah, I most people are. But yeah, so like the side profile is fine, whatever. And then you get this front facing one, which I'm definitely going to use on our cover on the website and everything else, because it's just like what. And even like, so in X Plus figures, they have what's called deforreals, which are like these tiny little statues that are deformed, but they're cool. And even the deforreal looks better than the actual suit, right? And it's even like it's caricaturized and it looks better than the actual suit. So that would be the thing I change, is figuring out how did you guys get it looking good from the side, and then up front it's just it's absolutely atrocious. So
that's
there's your answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably speak a little heresy, so I'm kindling my own fire for the stake. But if they remade this movie with good looking CG, like King of the Monsters CG, it would probably bump it up a couple of notches, in my opinion, just because it wouldn't be so quite distracting.
And see, I would disagree with you there, just because I'm so over these CGI fests. Like, I can't wait for you to watch some of these 2000s films. Like GMK, I think is the best example of like what Suitmation can look like with CGI, like to complement it. But yeah, I agree. I think there's a charm to the suits. This one just loses some of the charm.
Yeah, that charm can really only go like so far.
Yeah. The other films do a really good job at it, but this one's just like, I love the Anguirus suit immensely.
Yeah.
Like there's like he's my boy. But yeah, it's just it's different.
Yeah, maybe since you brought him up, maybe if there's something that I would change, might just be him, just in terms of not him himself, but some of his backstory, just how they explained him, like how they're so nonchalant, like, oh yeah, there are giant ankylosauruses everywhere, and it's like, it's the year of our Lord 1940 something. No, there are not.
55.
Yeah, 1955. That's what I said.
Who said that?
Like, I don't know. It seems like that would be kind of a cool little. And I know it would just be lore. It wouldn't really do much for the movie, but it'd be kind of cool to just say, like, so Godzilla is a nuclear byproduct, and Anguirus is just a big lizard.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we're good. We actually are about an hour right now. So we were even talking about how like we don't know if we can even get to that. So again, Chris, I appreciate you joining me here. Now that we've got the bumpers underway, I don't have to really do an outro, which is nice. But what I will say is make sure, if you do like this, now here we're getting to the sales pitch. Please make sure, share it wherever you can. You know, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, MySpace might be coming back eventually, right? So if you could share on there, that would be awesome. Because here's the thing, like, we're not making any money off of this. We're actually paying $20 a month to record this online. So like, this isn't for money. It's just we would love to be able to have this be shared with as many people as possible. We're not quitting our day jobs for this. We don't have a Patreon page, nothing like that, right? So we legitimately are in your hands for any publicity.
Well, and a lot of that too, like, we don't really care as much for the clicks. If one person who's not our moms listen to this and you genuinely enjoy it, you genuinely have fun, you genuinely think, I want to follow these guys on Twitter, have a beer with them, talk Godzilla, maybe with David. That's all we're really looking for. We want your questions, not just so we can have content, even though it helps, but have your questions to be like, this is something that I'm thinking about Godzilla. Why don't you guys think about this with me? Because that's part of what we want to do. We want to be having the conversations we're all having.
Exactly. And my mom is the one who introduced me to Godzilla, so it's not a bad thing that she's listening. I hope you actually are. I'm kind of concerned that you're not. So when you listen to this part, Mom, text me so I know you're listening. And if I don't get a text in the next few weeks, I'm going to be a little pissed. But yeah, Chris is right. I mean, we're doing this because we actually want to have conversations with people, right? Like that's been the feedback I've gotten so far is like, hey, thanks for actually inviting people to think differently and to think deeper about the film without being polarizing. And I really am trying, personally, I can only speak for myself. I'm trying my best to be a part of the fandom where, I can challenge people to think differently, but I'm also not being like a flaming douchebag while I do it.
I like to think that I, unbesmirched by opinions and unbesmirched by other people, period, any polarization is an accident. So if I've pushed any of your buttons, and I will push your buttons, at least know it's out of naivete rather than trying to be a flaming douchebag.
Malicious. Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Like we said, if you can, share it, subscribe on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, stuff like that. And we will be diving into Rodan here shortly, which, again, very, very excited for that one.
Thank you for listening to the Kaiju Apostle podcast. You can tune in to future episodes on most major podcast distributors, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. For more information, including music credits, please visit our website at www.thekaijuapostle.com or at instagram.com/the.kaiju.apostle. We appreciate your support and hope to hear from you soon.